this conversation I had over breakfast this morning seemed really significant, so thought I'd share. I was being told this story. The person telling me the story had held this opinion for a long time. Recently had the opportunity to confront someone about it. And when that happened, it came in the form of asking, tell me about this. Where does this come from? What's its significance? Why? Right? And then that person shared. Here's why. And it turns out that actually they had very similar sensibilities. And that resulted in slightly different behaviors, but they actually felt very similar things about all of this. And so what could have been a point of contention between them actually became an opportunity for connection, for a deepening of connection. And that got me thinking about a lot of the conflict resolution work I've done, all the mediating I did, and one of the things it really taught me is how much we value reciprocity, mutuality. When we give gifts, we don't want there to be an expectation that we get things in return, and yet we want there to be a free giving one direction and a free giving the other direction. We like when relationships go two directions. When I'm teaching this to my students, I will demonstrate by approaching one of them, offering to shake their hands, and I'll say, hello, my name is Steven, and then I'll stop talking. And of course, within a few moments, some of them are quicker than others, they'll respond with their name. It's that simple. I'll say, this is where I'm from, and stop talking. And they eventually catch on, and they'll say, this is where I'm from. There's a silent pressure in us to be reciprocal. And so we use that in conversations all the time. It helps us flow, right? But it's not just about conversation. It's how we work in relationships at all. If I want someone to really hear me, one of the best things I can do is actually really hear them first. Because if someone feels like they're being heard, that really impacts people. They're likely to listen to that person in return. Someone who really hears you becomes significant to you, and so you're likely to listen back. Same thing works for trust. If you want to build trust with someone where there isn't any, you'll have to start by trusting them. And it may not always pay off really well, but you're unlikely to earn someone's trust without demonstrating some trust in them first. It's reciprocal. So when I was mediating conflicts, this is something I would have to model for people, but also try to teach them in the process. Typically, when people are in the midst of a conflict, they're not particularly interested in learning how conflict works. But it is important to learn the thing that you're trying to do in the process. And I would have to convince them. If you truly want resolution here, then it will take some vulnerability on your part. You have to, at some point, open some kind of trust. And you hope that that will be returned, but it's not guaranteed. And if you're in conflict with someone, you know it's not guaranteed that they will return that trust. In fact, you're unlikely to be vulnerable toward that person at all because you're pretty certain it won't be returned. But if I can get both parties to agree, yeah, we both want resolution. We both want to establish some kind of trust here. And then they're both willing to step out and be vulnerable toward each other, then progress would be made. But the whole point is that you can't resolve conflict from a defensive position. By definition, you're closed off to the other. It is possible to resolve conflict, but not as long as your only goal is to protect yourself. You have to leave yourself vulnerable. You have to be open. Here's why I'm talking about all this today. Because it occurs to me that when I feel the most at home in my religious tradition, it's because of this stuff. When I think about the incarnation, I think about God being vulnerable on purpose. God demonstrating trust in us first in order to earn our trust. And wanting to establish trust so much so that when we fight back, when we push back and say, we don't trust, absorbing the violence in hopes that we can move beyond the violence. Being nonviolent doesn't mean avoiding conflict. It doesn't mean giving in to violence. It does not mean being weak. Being nonviolent means actually putting yourself on the line, actually being sacrificial in hopes of making things better, in hopes of healing and restoring and redeeming. Being nonviolent means overcoming in the best way possible, precisely through vulnerability. It works for people, and it's the only way I can make sense of a God who is interested in redeeming the world, violence and all. When I think about Christmas, what I think about is the vulnerability of God, the weakness of God. Not in the sense of being helpless, though it entails an element of that, for sure. But in the sense that only through the refusal to use power over the other can we actually win the other over. When I'm most at home in my religious tradition, this is how I make sense of it. And it's also why I find it difficult to have a lot of conversations with other people in my tradition. Far more common is the reading of my tradition that says the same thing as the oldest myth there is, that order comes through violence, that violence itself is good and creative and restorative and all that, and I just can't accept that. And I feel like if more people had the experience I have, assisting people in working through conflict and seeing how possible it is, seeing how well it works and how it works, that I don't think they would so easily accept that old myth that order comes through violence. Because order doesn't come through violence, order comes through the overcoming of violence, through generosity, creativity, imagination, resourcefulness, humility, vulnerability, restoration. Those are my thoughts for the day. I would love to hear yours.